The roster churn continues as the Chiefs get closer to the NFL draft. Some news, some comings, and what's going to happen as they get ready for making their selections. This is Locked On NFL. This is Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back to the Chiefs Show, everybody. It's Locked On, part of your team every day. This is Matt Derrick, who's going to be talking to me here in a moment. If I point the right direction, thank you for making us your first listen. Make the draft show your second listen, will you? Because we put a lot of work into that and a lot of time. We would appreciate it. We are free on every platform, including YouTube, where you can like, sub, and hit that bell so that you find out everything. I'm Ryan Tracy, founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, home of the Athletic Matrix and Draft Guide. This is Matt Derrick from ChiefsDigest.com, beat reporter extraordinaire and the man about town. How you doing, Matt?
I'm hanging in there, Ryan. Congratulations to you, your Jayhawks. I'm sure there's a handful of people out there who are very, very happy today.
There are a handful. None of them live in Missouri, but that's okay. And you know what? Well earned. I thought the interesting thing is I thought that the Jayhawks last night showed the perseverance that we hoped to see from the Chiefs all last season. And we saw it at times. You know, certainly the Reaper game against the Bills comes to mind. But in the end, I think that when you're talking about younger kids that can do that kind of thing, it comes back to the makeup of the roster that you're building in the NFL. And that comes around, you know, when you have to make some transactions. And a couple happened this week that I really want to get your take on. I kind of had in the back of my head that Armani Watts was a guy that had put in enough time, particularly on special teams, was going to end up back in Kansas City. That is not the case. He is signed in Indianapolis, the old friend Chris Ballard. Is this a blow to what their offseason plan might have been, or do you think this was the expectation all along?
Yeah, I don't think it's a blow. I mean, you know, remember that the Chiefs, I mean, are rebuilding their special teams core this offseason, whether that's by just choice or just the way that it plays out. But they had so many core special teams players who are going to be free agents this offseason. And the bottom line is that, I mean, you can't just keep a bunch of guys around because they're good special teams players. At some point, you need those guys to be able to contribute and give you snaps other places too. And, you know, with Watts, that was just something that just never seemed to click for him in Kansas City. Never a big surprise when anybody goes from Kansas City to Indy or Indy to Kansas City. I mean, there's some DNA there with Chris Ballard and Brett Veach. So, you know, the same guys are going to be on both their list a lot of times. Interested to see how it works out for Armani Watts. I mean, obviously, you know what the Colts are getting, core special teams guy. It's just going to be, can he add the other part of it? But and Watts is not alone. I mean, the Chiefs are rebuilding their special teams unit this offseason. It's not going to be the only new face. There's going to be some others. There have been some additions as well. So that doesn't surprise me. I mean, we knew that there was going to be some turnover in that group as it was.
When it comes to those moves, particularly on teams when you have to build up from the bottom of the roster, it definitely seems like the two teams do have if not DNA, at least a common blood type in the kinds of players that they look for. I think that, unfortunately, this was probably part of the plan, but it doesn't go any farther towards explaining to us what the plan is, because I still think there's at least 5 spots open on guys that have to play at least more than one of the teams in this coming season. Is that all got to come from rookie signings? Is it going to be a flood of free agents after the draft? Where are you falling on this kind of plan right now?
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of the things, unfortunately, for Dave Toub that you pay him the big bucks for. I mean, that, you know, he's had a very veteran, you know, special teams unit the last few years. That's not going to be what it is this year. Now they've signed a couple of guys, you know, previously during this free agency period who are very good special teams players that if they're able to make the roster as depth pieces at some other positions, you know, corner, receiver, you know, safety. I mean, there's some places, linebacker, where they've added some guys that if they compete and win some roster spots, they're going to they may be new faces, but they're going to give you some depth there. But I also think that, you know, the Chiefs wanted to get younger on that unit. I mean, it's one of the things about special teams is that it's a full out game. And, you know, even though you might have an experienced special teams unit, if everybody on there is 28 and 32 years old, probably means they're also not as fast. And I thought there were times last year that, you know, that the Chiefs, hey, they may have had the savvy, they may have had the experience, but I'm not sure that they always had the explosiveness and maybe the speed. But once again, I mean, that's why you have a good Dave Tobe. I mean, it's his job to make it all fit. And I don't think they're done. I mean, yeah, I mean, they're absolutely. I mean, the Chiefs are going to pick up some guys in the draft that I think are absolutely going to be able to help them on special teams as well. There's going to be some guys that are sticking around that have been a part of special teams are going to be there. And like I said, there's some of the guys that they've already signed, I think will make this team primarily as special teamers.
I think that's perfectly fine. You want the athleticism in a special teams unit that, like you said, you don't have to have. I always find that special teams ace as a moniker something that really denotes a guy on the backside of his athleticism, and you rub yourself raw trying to get these pieces to fit inside the puzzle. So at this point, it seems like it is a total rebuild in terms of what Dave Tobe's going to have to work with, except for possibly returner. How do you feel about that in particular?
Yeah, that one's going to be interesting because, I mean, really Chiefs' primary returner that they've got within experience is going to be McCole Hardman. And I think that, hey, the Chiefs shown that they're still comfortable with him as a punt returner. Question's going to be, hey, if they're comfortable with him adding kick return to that as well. I mean, he's done it before, but he lost that job for a reason. To me, it's going to be interesting. I mean, there's going to be at the Chiefs. Experience is not a prerequisite there. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, Dave Tobe turned Tremon Smith into a Pro Bowl kick returner his first season. I mean, as a rookie. So, they can get that skill out of a lot of different guys. And it wouldn't surprise me with 12 draft picks if they're not going to be looking at a defensive back or a receiver running back that has a lot of return experience in college. I mean, that can certainly be something that they're looking for. Other than that, I mean, there's not anything to me, an obvious solution that stands out of any of the free agent additions so far that would be, okay, well, this is the guy who's come in to return kicks. I mean, at this point, honestly, I mean, yeah, I'd probably say Hardman would be your number one guy on both teams right now.
I'm glad we both see it that way. There's something shady I need to tell you guys about, but coming up next, we're going to get into the defensive line and what additions they're adding right now to foretell what they're going to do. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of a $200 pair of sunglasses at a fraction of the cost. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. And the big thing is their insane protection program. And it's included for lost or broken protection on every single pair that they sell. They will send you a brand new pair of sunglasses if you lose them, no matter what happened. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head over to shadyrays.com and use the code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of their polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for the best deal of the season, 50% off of 2 or more pairs of their Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Thanks to our newest sponsor. We appreciate that one. Matt, another signing. As Armani Watts departs, Taylor Stallworth comes in, a guy that had a lot of upside a couple seasons ago. I think that this kind of like delineates what they're trying to do. A little bit more explosive, a little bit more pass rush oriented. I think we've seen the bigger bodies, the Jaron Reeds, the Derrick Notties that have held up against the run, especially in years when the Chiefs weren't very good against the run. But I think that is really revealing itself to be more of a choice now. That pass rush on the D-line has to be something that they have. Is that what this is signaling to you too, or is this just an opportunistic pickup of a decent player?
I mean, I think probably first and foremost, it is just an opportunity to add some depth. I mean, that across the line, I mean, the Chiefs don't necessarily have a huge amount of depth on that defensive front right now. Obviously, I think we think that there's probably going to be some more movement at that edge position, certainly if not in the draft and probably in free agency as well. But tackle was also a spot. I mean, even though they brought back Derrick Nottie, they still need a little bit of depth there. I mean, they've got, obviously some guys like Tershawn Wharton, Colin Saunders still around. But to me, yeah, Stallworth, you mentioned Jaron Reed leaving. I mean, he's a different player. He's different little style, a little bit different flavor. And I think you're right. I mean, to me, he's not quite as big as maybe some other guys that they've brought in at that position. So they are maybe looking for something a little bit different. But again, this is a guy, we talked about the Colt Chief DNA. I mean, this is a guy coming from Indianapolis. Before that with the Saints, which is another team that kind of seems to have shares a little sentiment with the Colts and Chiefs about the kind of guys that they like. So it's not a ton of surprise there, but Let's be realistic. I mean, Taylor Stallworth is a depth piece. I mean, he's not coming in to start. I mean, if he comes in and competes and win a starting position, to me, that's a concern.
Oh, yeah.
But what I think you're looking for him is that he's a rotational piece. And if he comes in and wins a job, to me, good for him. But that would make me worry about that interior front.
Yeah, I was taking it from the player perspective. Good for him for seizing an opportunity.
Good for him. Maybe not great for the front.
There's a lot in this draft that I think is going to come down to not necessarily versatility, but there's also some small school. Missouri State's got another D lineman that they can look at. I expect that they very much will. I am concerned about the depth of true pass rushers in this D line group in this draft class. So for me, maybe the rotation is the key. Maybe that's the philosophical change, that you need to rotate them through, platoon them more, so that if you're not going to get the uber quality of the pass rush, you're going to be able to keep guys fresher. I think Turk Warden may be ready to take a step forward. Hopefully Colin Saunders is as well. But I don't think any of those guys are 60 snap a game guys. Do you?
No, not at this point. I mean, they haven't quite shown that yet. So, and that's why, I mean, the addition of Stallworth is probably a key piece, because at this point, do you have a true starting tackle group? I mean, somebody to go along with Chris Jones. I mean, Derrick Notty's been a starter, but he hasn't been a 60 kind of snap kind of guy. I mean, none of the other guys have either. So at this point, is that number 2 spot and the depth, is it by committee kind of a position that you match up each week? I mean, we've seen the Chiefs do that a little bit in the past, where, they just kind of either, if it's not the hot hand and it's the guy who matches up well that week. I still think that they're missing a spot there, and they need to get better pass rush across the board. Because at this point, I think they need it everywhere. It's not just a matter of, adding an edge rusher. I think they probably need another interior rusher as well.
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 across the defensive
Absolutely.
front, right? You need that new blood. I don't think you can count on Kando. I think Mike Dana is proving to be serviceable, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of athletic, explosive upside there. We're going to have to see how that goes. But the defensive unit as a whole has a lot of maybe kind of guys that I'd want to see take a step forward. Prioritization wise, where do you think it has to be specifically at the tackle? Obviously, edge, I think, is higher quality, higher priority. But where in the weekend's events do you think that they need to really emphasize getting somebody that can get after the passer from the other tackle spot?
Yeah, that's what I find interesting, because, you mentioned about the fact that that edge position in the draft, I think there's a handful of players that I think that the Chiefs are interested at the top of that board. But how long is that tail after that? I mean, is it something that, late first round or going into the second round that you're comfortable with? I'm not sure that depth is there. I mean, I think that by the time, unfortunately for the Chiefs, if they stand pat at 29, probably most of the guys that they would consider first round grades aren't going to be there. Tackle might be more interesting. There might be a few players that, do fit what Spags wants to do, and might be some intriguing choices as inside rushers. There's also, we've talked about it, I think, before. I mean, there's some kind of tweener players as well. I mean, the guys, that I think there's some, disputes and, disagreements about whether they're inside and outside players. And that always worries me, because if you can't decide whether a guy's an inside or an outside guy, chances are he's neither. It's just, that's the problem. So yeah, I mean, to me, if the Chiefs want an impact rusher, it's not going to be there at 29, whether it's an inside or an outside guy. They've got the currency to move up. So if they're dead set on getting a pass rusher one way or another, they got the currency to go get it. It's just, is that the player that they want there at a price that they're willing to pay? Sitting back, I think makes it much more difficult, because I think I'm with you in that I think that after the maybe 2023, I think it just becomes a little bit more of a crapshoot, as far as that defensive line group goes.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. It's not the only position that they've got to kind of revamp. There's a lot of stories in the wind about what they need to do in the secondary. That's coming up next. It's that time of the year. You might not be done with your New Year's resolution, but you got to keep fighting for it. Whether you're trying to get fitter or you're just trying to live a cleaner life, Built Bar can help you. These are the bars that you want to get. They're the best tasting protein bars out there. They're incredible. And it doesn't matter if you like the cinnamony churro, the coconut marshmallow, the straight coconut brownie chunk that I love, as well as the toffee almond. They're all there. They're all delicious. And they give you what you need to try to stay fit and support yourself in your goals for this new year. They're low calorie, high protein, and low in everything that you don't need. You can go over there. They're generally about 130 to 150 calories. They have 4 grams of net sugars. They have 4 net carbs. They have 17 on average grams of protein per bar. You can compare them to like a candy bar. It's like 240 calories. And that's what you get the difference in using Built Bars. Mint Brownies, popular flavor right now. They have a bunch of the new puffs that are the marshmallow protein. Our offer, as always, is at Built.com. It's the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off of your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Now, the rumor of the week, or the last 3 weeks, has been, okay, we didn't get a whole lot of work done there in the early waves of free agency. We got a couple of things, but now we want to work some trades, even though we feel like free agency, especially at the secondary positions, is probably a little bit dry. So we're going to go try to pry somebody away, see who's in a cap frustration or something like that. Then Jeff Chiato breaks it nationally. So I hope that he checked with you at least, that maybe the interest has withdrawn from trying to chase somebody down that is under contract in New York and Bradbury. That I still question whether that is an actual fit or would signal a change in the volume of zone versus man that they would have to play in the secondary. But I think that is smart, but it does also say that they were in it at some point. So how concerned should we be about the fact that they're trying to rip players away from other teams? Is that a note of desperation, or is this just opportunistic?
I think if they made a deal at all costs, then I think that would tell me that there's a little bit of desperation there. But I think it's probably interesting with Bradbury, a player like that, because it doesn't appear that the trade value would have been that high for a guy like that. It's not like you're trading a first-round pick for him or anything like that. I mean, you're talking about more likely a middle-round pick. And that price, I mean, hey, an established, veteran player, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad move. But I think, as we talked about before, I mean, that was probably more of a not only a player you have to trade for, but a player that you can't live with that cap number for this year. I think his cap number was 13.5 in a trade. That's not in the budget right now. So that was a deal where if you're going to make a trade, there's going to have to be an adjustment to the contract as well. And if that you can't get that done, then there's no trade.
Right.
So I think it's, to me, I don't think it's a sign of desperation, because if it was that, I mean, I think it would definitely be, you get a deal done at all cost. To me, I think that's one of the things that certainly they've taken advantage of with having Spags as their defensive coordinator, is that he is willing to adjust his coverage based on the talent that he has around him. That's not the way all defensive coordinators are. Some guys, they will take square pegs and try to squeeze them in the round holes. Spags won't do that. The one thing, that I keep hearing and I keep seeing pop up and everything like that, that I know maybe a lot of people are surprised about, is that the interest that maybe the Chiefs are having in a safety going into the draft. And, and here's one thing that makes me just entertain the possibility that maybe the Chiefs will go safety early on, is that I think even though Chiefs fans look at it and say, you know what, Justin Reed, Juan Thornhill, pretty good, top 2 combo there. Remember, the Chiefs have spent the last 2 seasons trying to get almost anybody in the world to play in Juan Thornhill's spot.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I think you just have to question, what the Chiefs truly believe in Juan Thornhill. And if the case is that they continue to view Juan Thornhill the same way that they did last season and even 2 years ago, I think you're probably acknowledging that if he's their number 3, then they're still in the market for a safety. And that's what just really makes me curious, that that's a position that early in this draft is going to pop up on their board.
So does that preclude you from thinking that a player that may be one of these hybrids, much like Tyrann Mathieu, can play robber to nickel, not robber to high? Is that the way that they have to lean, or are they looking for? Does this signal to you that maybe a true, at least a cover 2 high safety might be on the table?
I mean, to me, I think it tells me that if anything, they're open to any position. I mean, they're not locked in. That the fact that they need to walk away with one particular kind of player. I mean, if the Chiefs do set pat, or let's say there's a scenario where they move up, to get a player that they like, and they sit back at 30, and they've still got a late first-round pick. If they're going to tackle secondary, I don't think that they're have forced themselves into a position that's like, okay, we got to get a corner. No, we need to get a box safety. No, we need to get a guy that can play the back end. I think they can really go any way. If a player presents himself and gets to them, that is a guy that can play multiple. We know that's a player that Spags loves and can plug in anywhere. Not a lot of those guys, but if you find one, absolutely. But I at this point, I mean, if you told me that the Chiefs were just going to take a secondary player in the first 2 rounds, it wouldn't stun me. And honestly, any position wouldn't stun me.
Okay. So let me circle that back to the other side of it. L'Jarius Sneed is the most talented and most productive DB on this roster right this minute, right? Particularly in Spags' system. Does that mean that you want him to remain as like that jackknife that can do anything? Or do you want to put him in a position, unlike that we've seen the last couple of seasons, where he does one thing? I particularly like to see him just man the outside and bring in a nickel that is trained to that and try to take care of 2 positions with a move. Is that asking too much in your opinion?
It might be. And I love just how aggressive that L'Jarius Sneed plays. I mean, that aggression and especially his willingness to initiate contact. I mean, it's not something you get in a lot of corners. And obviously he's played safety before. So I know that for some people, it's been a natural question, hey, do you move L'Jarius Sneed to, Tyrann Mathieu spot? Does he become that kind of guy? Part of me is no. I mean, he's too good at what he's been. Why change that? To me, it's the exact same scenario. I mean, that the Chiefs have with Chris Jones. I mean, why would you move him from doing what he's been effective? It may look good on paper, but probably won't work in the real world. I mean, to me, Sneed has found himself a role that he's really, really good at. And as physical as he is, to me, as a corner, that physicality is going to be probably a little bit more muted as a safety. I mean, there are going to be a lot harder hitting players at safety than Sneed, whereas he's going to be one of the harder hitting corners out there. To me, it's keep him at that. I think he found the spot where he can play where, whether it's inside or outside, he can cover. I mean, you don't want to lose that to me. And yeah, I mean, I think the possibility is that it might be too much. I mean, some players can handle it, and L'Jarius Sneed might be one of those guys. But to me, if you got a guy that is playing at a level that he's playing right now, I wouldn't want to change that.
Yeah, I don't either. What I want to do is put him on the outside at corner and leave him there and not have him be in the nickel.
That I think is a better chance, but I still would not be surprised if the Chiefs currently viewed him as their best inside guy.
Okay. So that said, that opens out the possibility for another acquisition. There is a veteran out there that has also been rumored to be at least of interest to the Kansas City Chiefs, and I would think that he needs to play on the outside or at the safety spot. Your take on interest in Stephon Gilmore, is it real? And what do you like or dislike about the fit?
Yeah, it certainly seems like there's some interest there and potentially mutual interest. Once again, I mean, I think that's all going to come down to cost. I mean, it's, is there a price at which, both sides are comfortable with? The Chiefs are not made of money. I mean, they've signed a few players and they do have a little bit of cap space available. But it's not like they can just go out and give $12 million to anybody that they want to. I mean, they need a deal that makes sense. And Gilmore, I think, is a guy who could certainly fit into this defense. I mean, I think the question would be at this point in his career, it's the same question that I ask with even some of the other guys that the Chiefs brought in, like Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, is he the same guy you think of when you hear the name? I'm not sold on that as much. I mean, you're right. I mean, maybe he does need to be a little bit more of a safety at this point because maybe the cover and speed skills aren't quite there anymore. I mean, it's to me, that's the key question, is he still the guy you think he is? But I think once again, I mean, to me, the cost is going to be the determining factor there. I mean, if there's an opportunity to land a player like that, an affordable deal, absolutely. But if that's a guy who still wants to play for the money and for whom the chance to compete and be with a winning team isn't the primary factor, then he probably won't end up in KC.
Yeah, it's just not enough to go around at this point. It'll be interesting to see what they do next, folks. You can traffic and follow all of the traffic, the in and out of town for the player acquisitions over at ChiefsDigest.com with Matt Derrick. You can also listen to us here. We appreciate you. We're here every day. You might as well keep listening to us tomorrow. So check out the YouTube channel as well. We are free on all those platforms. Remember that. The draft guide is coming. You can get a significant discount if you go over to rogueapc.com and use the code RGR22AM or Locked On. I like them both, so let's go with Locked On for this show. Lot going there, and Matt, you'll get a crack at it, of course, as soon as I can get the thing finished. Last thing, I just want to try to get to the point where I have a concept of how much studying I have to do. Over under, do the Chiefs take 8.5 players in this draft?
I was having a conversation earlier today that this exact same number came up, that, with the Chiefs having 12 picks in the draft. I said I would probably put the over under at 7.5 or 8.5, and I'd probably still bet the under. I mean, this is a year where the Chiefs could probably fit in more draft picks on their roster than in most seasons. But hey, is Brett Veach going to make a move up in the first round and move some of that? Possible. Is Brett Veach going to get into the 6th round and say, you know what? I don't need 4 7th round picks. I got a guy here in the 6th round that we got a 4th round grade on. We're going to go get him. Chiefs always come out with fewer players than they have picks. So I'm going, even at 8.5, I'm going to go under.
Ooh, look at that. So that means you're saying 2/3 of the selections is all they're taking. I like it. At 8.5, I'll take the over. I say they take 9, but not by much. So, folks, let us know what you think. Leave your comments on YouTube and in the reviews on Spotify and iTunes and all that stuff. Matt, thanks for all the time today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. And unsolicited, go get the draft guide and listen to the draft show. Both are indispensable.
Cheers. I appreciate that, folks. You have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.